As I mentioned earlier today, the House unanimously passed a bill that requires the director of the National Intelligence Agency to declassify any information regarding the origins of the COVID pandemic. The Senate version of the measure passed earlier this month, also by unanimous consent. Now, the unanimous votes, exceedingly rare, send a strong message that it's time for the Biden administration to let the American people know what's going on. The question is, will the president listen? And just what could the declassified information reveal? Well, here with me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Matt Rosendale. He is a member of the House Freedom Caucus, the Veterans Affairs Committee, and the Committee on Natural Resources. He represents the 2nd Congressional District of Montana. Congressman Rosendale, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me on, Tony. It's always good to be with you.
Well, it's good to see you. The measure passed unanimously in both houses of Congress. That's quite significant. What is the message that this sends to the president?
I think it makes it very clear that the American people want to see the origins and the background of this COVID-19 virus. They suffered with it. We had closures, we had school closures, we had business shutdowns, and they want to find out what the origins were. I think everybody has pretty well come to the conclusion, Tony, that it did originate in this Wuhan lab in China. And now what we're trying to determine is what kind of participation did the United States have in that lab, in the scientists, in any of that work whatsoever, so that we can make sure that this never does happen again. I don't think that we will ever get the true story of whether this was released on the general population accidentally or whether it was an intentional act by the Chinese Communist Party. I don't know that we'll ever determine that, but we at least need to know what role the United States played in funding and helping to develop this terrible, terrible virus.
Do you think we'll also find out information that has been discussed in other committees about how the government used social media to tamp down, silence those who were raising questions about the origins of this virus and how it was to be confronted?
I believe that that will probably take place in some of the select committee work that we're seeing on the weaponization of the agencies, the weaponization of the government against citizens. I think that those are the committees that are going to bring that information out so that we can see exactly how these large platforms utilize their enormous reach to censor the ability for the American people to voice their opinions and to share information that would have been beneficial and probably would have saved thousands of lives had they been able to share it freely and allow people to utilize the extra information that they had.
Right. So it's not just about looking back for wanting to find out who held what withheld what information, but it's also about preparing for the future. What type of information do you think will be made available when this is declassified?
Well, the most important information to me is to see what kind of participation the United States had. And then it's going to put us in a position to start going into these same areas to find out if they are still funding similar type activities in other places around the world.
You're talking about the gain of function that basically created this virus.
That's exactly right. The gain of function experiments that were taking place to try and increase the capacity or the strength, if you will, of any of these viruses. And once we can identify what role the United States had and what doctors were working on this, then we can use that information to make sure that we look in other areas of the budget and of these agencies to make sure that this work is not being continued.
That would also point to, if this information comes out, this could point to some culpability from some in the government for participating in this and then trying to cover it up.
Absolutely. We have heard time and time again that it's typically not the act that gets folks into trouble. It is the cover up that they try thereafter. And let's just say this had escaped accidentally from the Wuhan lab. The virus had escaped. then possibly there was the ability for people to declare that they were just trying to do some type of research. Now, while it wasn't authorized in this country, certainly, and we're still going to have to look at that and see what funds were being used by who was using this. But typically, it is the cover up thereafter that causes most of the problems, Tony.
Yeah. Can you foresee the president under any circumstance vetoing this, given that it passed unanimously, both the House and Senate?
I wouldn't think so. We just saw the other resolution to rein in the out of control DC government that was able to get passed. And the president initially said that he was going to veto that. And then he saw the overwhelming support that came through to make sure that we could rein in DC from taking these acts and allowing criminals to run free, that there was so much support for within Congress and the Senate that he ended up signing that into law. So I would think that he would certainly sign this into law as well.
Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about the House Freedom Caucus and their proposal to the president in terms of what it's going to take to get their support moving forward, whether it be the debt ceiling or appropriations bills. Do you see, given what you just talked about, the president, recognizing the crime problem we have in D.C., now recognizing, hopefully, that the American people have a right and a desire to know about what was behind COVID? Do you think he might moderate a little bit and actually meet Republicans halfway?
On the budget discussions that we're going to be
on the
entering
budget.
into?
Right.
Unfortunately, I'm not really optimistic about that. But what I will tell you is no different than the rules debate that we had at the very beginning of the 118th Congress, where we being the many of the members of the Freedom Caucus, that we passed the reforms. We recommended the reforms to restore regular order to Congress, and we're able to get that rules package put forward and passed. I think that there's going to be a lot of momentum over the next couple of weeks as we go through and describe and identify the areas where we can show savings. Once that is done and those areas are made very public, which we are going to do, he's going to have a difficult time, he being the president, to completely ignore those reductions. When we see that there's this excess COVID money that hasn't been spent, certainly we should be able to claw that back. When we see that there's duplicative programs, 2, 3, 4, 10 programs that are trying to accomplish the same thing, we should be able to remove that money from the budget and add that back into the Treasury so that we don't bump up against this debt ceiling. When we see the 87,000 IRS agents that I certainly don't, and I know the people of Montana don't want searching around the country trying to justify their jobs by assessing fines and penalties to people that own their own businesses, whether that's a farm or a ranch or the ice cream store on the corner. I think that he's going to have a hard time keeping those funds in place. So we're going to deliver on this reductions to bring this into line. We cannot pass a budget that is calling for $6.8 trillion in spending, $5 trillion in new taxes, Tony, continue to mount up an additional $1.3 trillion in debt annually to add to the $31.5 trillion that we already have. That is not good for the economy. It is not good for our national security, and it certainly isn't good for the people in Montana.
No. Well, it's not good for the people anywhere in this country. Congressman Matt Rosendale, great to see you. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much.